Even as the March 1st, 2013 sequester loomed, Congress was no more willing to compromise and remained locked in fierce debate over spending levels, the budget, and the Affordable Care Act. In September, Senator Ted Cruz, Republican from Texas, led some Tea Party Republicans and other conservative senators in a plan to defund Obamacare and ensure cuts in government spending, believing that Democrats and the White House would accept their position to prevent the government from shutting down. They had miscalculated, though, and October 1st, 2013, the federal government shut down all but essential services. The shutdown was widely unpopular, with a majority of Americans blaming the Republicans. Facing public condemnation, on October 17th, enough Republicans reversed their position that the Senate passed an appropriations bill, reopening the federal government and postponing further efforts to resolve the budget and levels of government funding until February, after the 2014 elections. Foreign policy issues also divided the nation and Congress as the new Congress began. Republicans and many Democrats voiced concern over Obama's conduct of foreign and military policies, especially toward the Middle East and Russia. They sharply disagreed with their president's efforts to negotiate a multilateral, meaning many-sided, nuclear agreement with Iran. In the spring of 2014, when Russia annexed the Crimea and supported revolts in the eastern provinces of the Ukraine, many Republicans complained of Obama's timidity and called for the administration to take more aggressive steps to counter Russian actions. Overall, they argued that Obama's lack of leadership and decisiveness diminished the status and security of the U.S. Reflecting the polarization on foreign policy, Congressman Peter King, Republican from New York, commented, "I think there's a real policy difference, and I'd say it's there because of Obama." But the central issue for most Americans was the continued instability in Syria, Iraq, and Afghanistan, which fueled increasing terrorist and anti-American activities. Republicans were quick to criticize Obama's handling of the expanding civil war in Syria and his response to the emergence of the Islamic State in Iraq and Syria, or ISIS, a major terrorist organization. As the Syrian civil war grew more brutal and destructive, many in the U.S. called for stronger American intervention to remove Assad and to confront ISIS, which had arisen out of the chaos of Syria and the continued instability of Iraq. By 2012, it was not only occupying increasing amounts of territory in Syria, but was also calling for the establishment of a new Islamic State, a caliphate. Initially, few took ISIS seriously. Many analysts thought it was best to just leave the Islamic State alone because it would destroy itself. Obama called ISIS the junior varsity JV team. But by the summer of 2014, ISIS had captured the world's agenda with its brutal public and televised beheadings of captives and its success in seizing key areas in northern Syria and Iraq. The U.S. first responded by launching limited airstrikes in August against selected targets in northern Iraq to aid Kurdish fighters. A month later, joined by 5 Arab partners, the U.S. bombed selected targets in Syria. By mid-November, the U.S. had flown over 1,000 missions against ISIS targets, and it increased the number of American advisors in Iraq to over 3,000. Still, for Republicans and other critics of the Obama administration, ISIS' successes were further proof of the administration's ineptitude and weakness in foreign policy. The 2014 election. The emergence of ISIS and the Ukrainian crisis, combined with the ideological gridlock that made the 113th Congress one of the least productive in American history, served as the background for the 2014 congressional elections. With Obama's popularity ratings hovering in the mid-40% range, Republican candidates focused on national and international issues and called the election a referendum on the presidency. In addition to Obama's weaknesses in foreign policy, Republican candidates stressed their differences regarding the economy and social issues. Despite an economy that had returned the stock market, job market, and unemployment to pre-Great Recession levels, they claimed that the administration's micromanaging of the economy through regulations and restrictions on free enterprise had not restored prosperity. Emphasizing ideological purity, Republicans vowed to resist or overturn the president's social policies, ranging from Obamacare to immigration to gay marriage. As elections approached in November, the question was just how large the Republican victory would be. The results exceeded most expectations, both nationally and at state and local levels. Republicans gained control of the Senate and expanded their majority in the House of Representatives, with many of the most conservative being elected from the South, the Rocky Mountain West, and exurban areas. Exurban, by the way, is a term referring to a region or settlement that lies outside of a city and usually beyond its suburbs, and that often is inhabited chiefly by well-to-do families. In the House, they joined the conservative Freedom Caucus and promised not to raise taxes and to resist compromises with the Democrats. With Republicans controlling a more conservative Congress, it was clear that the political deadlock would continue and the Republicans could mount more attacks to defund social programs, reduce government spending and regulations, and take exception to the administration's foreign policies. The extent of influence of the more conservative and militant wing of the Republican Party became public in September 2015, when Speaker of the House John Boehner announced he was resigning from the leadership position in the face of increasing opposition to his more moderate political positions. Only after weeks of internal discord did House Republicans agree to elect Paul Ryan as a compromise Speaker of the House. Ryan, as part of the negotiations, wrestled an agreement from the Freedom Caucus and other conservatives not to prevent passage of legislation extending the credit limit of the government and avoiding another shutdown. After hard bargaining between Republicans and Democrats, a comprehensive spending bill passed in late December that extended the funding of the government until September 2016. In defending the spending bill to conservatives in his own party, Ryan told them that in a divided government, you don't get everything you want. President Obama simply called the funding bill a Christmas miracle. Up to this point, providing funding for the government has been really difficult because each side is unwilling to give up key parts of their platform. They're unwilling to either make or extend or to brook tax cuts. They're unwilling to see programs, funded or defunded. There's a real lack of compromise present at this point in American history, and Congress is being incredibly unproductive because if they can't compromise, they can't get a lot of stuff done. Despite the December passage of the spending bill and other legislation reforming the education system and improving the nation's transportation infrastructure, few expected that the new Congress in 2016 would be willing to compromise, particularly as both parties geared up for the presidential election of 2016. Almost a full year before the 2016 elections, more than 15 Republican candidates had voiced their desire to be president, all emphasizing their conservative ideology and some stressing their anti-establishment and non-political backgrounds. Initially, the anti-establishment candidates, including millionaire businessman and television celebrity Donald Trump, took the lead in the polls heading into the presidential primary contests. Calling for immigration restrictions, the deportation of illegal immigrants, and promising to make America great again, there's that harkening back to Reagan again, Trump confounded his opponents, critics, and political observers and won a majority of the primaries. Especially popular with middle-class white male workers, having won more votes than any previous Republican primary candidate, Trump had gained the party's nomination. He cuts right to it, one supporter explained. While other politicians talk in so many words you don't know what question they're answering. On the Democratic side, Hillary Clinton quickly assumed the status of frontrunner but faced a spirited challenge from Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders, who attacked her positions as too conservative and as too close to Wall Street. In July, she won the Democratic nomination. In November of 2015, ISIS again grabbed world attention as it claimed credit for terrorist attacks around the globe, especially a horrific attack in Paris that killed more than 120 people. A few weeks later, Americans were stunned when, on December 3rd, an American and his Pakistani wife, both supporters of ISIS, attacked a regional center in San Bernardino, California, killing 14 people before they're shot by police. In May, another ISIS-inspired American using an assault rifle killed 49 people at an Orlando, Florida gay bar. It was the deadliest mass killing in American history. The Paris, San Bernardino, and Orlando attacks heightened fears about terrorism and generated calls, especially from many running for the presidency in 2016, for increased gun controls, more stringent immigration controls, and enhanced surveillance of suspected terrorists, as well as more aggressive American efforts to fight ISIS and its supporters at home and abroad, including calls by Trump to ban Muslims from coming into the United States. The 2016 election. As the presidential campaign began, the domestic and foreign policy differences between Trump and Clinton were significant. They disagreed on nearly everything from their visions of America, social issues, and immigration policies to how to improve the economy. As somebody who witnessed this election firsthand, I can absolutely verify that as a fact. They were absolutely very different in many ways. Trump's foreign policy positions stressed American interests and questioned Washington's international commitments, whereas former Secretary of State Clinton's foreign policies were more in keeping with Obama's existing policies. Yet despite the chasm between their policies, the campaign's central focus was on the character of the two candidates. Trump's opponents emphasized his abrasive and rash temperament and that he was not qualified to be president. Trump and his supporters in turn labeled Clinton as crooked and dishonest and voiced the view that her actions, especially those involving her private email account as Secretary of State, were inappropriate if not criminal. Supporting and reflecting the negative approach taken by both candidates, public opinion polls repeatedly indicated that a majority of the voting public disapproved of the character of both candidates. Facing off in 3 presidential debates, both candidates continued to emphasize personal attacks more than their differences on substantive issues. Clinton's popularity in the presidential polls gained considerable strength when in early October a video made in 2005 emerged from the television show Access Hollywood. It depicted Trump talking lewdly about his ability to physically approach or to, quote, move on women. "When you're a star, they let you do it," he bragged. He dismissed his body comments as, quote, locker room talk language, but many in the Republican Party were clearly embarrassed and tentatively withdrew their support for his candidacy. The leaked tape also helped propel Clinton's candidacy into her largest lead over Trump in the polls. With less than a month before the election, it appeared that she might even do well in traditionally Republican states and that her political coattails would contribute to Democrats regaining a majority in the Senate. Clinton's path to the presidency, however, was called into question and political polls narrowed as the FBI announced in late October that they had discovered additional Clinton emails from her private server that might contain classified materials. Earlier in June, the FBI announced that while as Secretary of State, she had poorly handled classified materials that had been found on her private email, but that her actions did not provide enough evidence to indict her for misuse of classified materials. The FBI's October announcement, less than 2 weeks before the election, re-energized Trump's and Republican criticisms of her dishonesty, corruptness, and arrogance. Remember that nickname they give her, Crooked Hillary? 2 days prior to the election, the FBI stated that the new batch of emails provided no reason for the FBI to alter their June assessment, but it did little to stop the narrowing of the polls as the country prepared to elect a new president. So the FBI goes back, and 2 days before the election, they say, wait, we're not charging her with anything. There's no indication that she's broken the law, done anything criminal here, but it's 2 days before the election by the time that this announcement gets made. During the last few days of the campaign, both candidates campaigned heavily in several swing states that would determine the outcome of the election. In Florida, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, Ohio, and Michigan, Clinton focused on urban areas while Trump drew large crowds in the more rural areas of those states. Most polls and political commentators agreed that the race would be tight, but they expected a Clinton win. On November 8th, the nation cast its votes. As expected, Clinton did well in urban areas and among African Americans and Latinos. But it was soon clear that the urban vote was being offset by a record voter turnout in rural areas across the nation. Trump does have this incredible energy to, get people to the polls. He absolutely is going to attract a lot of voter turnout. He runs a very attractive campaign for a lot of voters. Shortly after midnight, it was evident that the largely white vote in rural areas had contributed to turning nearly all the swing states into electoral victories for Trump. Despite losing the popular vote, Trump had been elected to the nation as the nation's 45th president. Speaking to the nation after their extremely acidic and divisive campaigns, both Trump and Clinton voiced the need for both sides to find common ground and to work together. Looking forward to his presidency, President Trump emphasized his support for immigration controls, a new approach to foreign and international economic policies, rebuilding America's infrastructure, restoring broad prosperity, appointing conservative Supreme Court justices, and repealing much of Obama's domestic legislation, including the Affordable Care Act. While many who voted Democrat expressed fears about the future of the country, Trump and Republicans vowed that they would be making America great again. Individual Voices, Nicholas Carr asks, is Google making us stupid? Historians are constantly reminded that some of the most important results of change are not always expected or even beneficial. In this document, a journalist comments on what he believes may be one of the most important and long-lasting outcomes of using new technologies to research and write. Over the past 2 years, I've had an uncomfortable sense that someone or something has been tinkering with my brain, remapping the neural circuitry, reprogramming my memory. My mind isn't going so far as I can tell, but it is changing. I'm not thinking the way I used to think. I can feel it most strongly when I'm reading. Now my concentration often starts to drift after 2 or 3 pages. I get fidgety, lose the thread, begin to look for something else to do. I think I know what's going on. I've been spending a lot of time online, searching and surfing. Research that once required days in libraries can now be done in minutes. For me, as for others, the net is becoming a universal medium, the conduit for most of the information that flows through my eyes and ears and into my mind. And what the net seems to be doing is chipping away my capacity for concentration and contemplation. My mind now expects to take in information the way the net distributes it, in a swiftly moving stream of particles. Once I was a scuba diver in the sea of words. Now I zip along the surface like a guy on a jet ski. Thanks to the ubiquity of text on the internet, not to mention the popularity of text messaging on cell phones, we may be reading more today than we did in the 1970s and 1980s, but it's a different kind of reading, and behind it lies a different kind of thinking, perhaps even a new sense of self. Reading is not an instinctive skill. We have to teach our mind how to translate the characters we see, the media or other technologies we use in learning. Reading plays an important part in shaping the circuits inside of our brain. Maybe I'm just a worrywart. Just as there's a tendency to glorify technological progress, there's a counter tendency to expect the worst of every new tool. Socrates bemoaned the development of writing. He feared that as people came to rely on the written word, they would cease to exercise their memory and become forgetful, and would be filled with a conceit of wisdom instead of real wisdom. You should be skeptical of my skepticism. Perhaps from the internet will spring a golden age of intellectual discovery and universal wisdom. Then again, the net isn't the alphabet, and although it may replace the printing press, it produces something altogether different. As we come to rely on computers to mediate our understanding of the world, it is our own intelligence that flattens into artificial intelligence. Summary. During the past 3 decades, the changing economy has shaped many of the nation's political and social issues. It contributed to Clinton's 1992 and Obama's 2008 presidential victories. Clinton placed the nation on a firm financial footing, balanced the budget, and reduced the national debt. The 2000 presidential election between Gore and Bush was very close and was decided only when the Supreme Court awarded Florida's electoral votes to Bush. President Bush began by implementing a tax cut, but the events of September 11, 2001, when terrorists affiliated with al-Qaeda attacked the U.S., eclipsed other issues. As the nation rallied around the administration, it established a Department of Homeland Security, and the U.S. joined forces with others in a war in Afghanistan that brought down the Taliban government and destroyed much of al-Qaeda's organization. In 2003, the Bush administration shifted its attention to Iraq. Claiming that Saddam Hussein possessed weapons of mass destruction and was linked to al-Qaeda, the U.S. led an invasion in March that toppled the Iraqi government. However, as the U.S. occupation of Iraq dragged on and American casualties increased, a growing number of Americans came to oppose Bush's conduct of the war. In 2004, Kerry used the war issue to mobilize his unsuccessful presidential campaign to defeat Bush. Bush won re-election in 2004, but by 2006, amid increasing public frustration over the war in Iraq and Bush's response to the damage caused by Hurricane Katrina, or his lack of a response, Democrats managed to regain a majority in Congress. In the 2008 presidential race, John McCain faced off against Barack Obama. Beset by an economic crisis, more Americans believed Obama would be better at fixing the economy than McCain, and they elected the first African-American president. In office, Obama advanced an ambitious agenda to fix the economy, create a national healthcare system, defeat al-Qaeda, and end the American presence in Iraq. Republicans vowed to oppose his programs, arguing that they were too expensive and expanded the size and power of the federal government. The ensuing acidic debates led to a newly energized conservative movement called the Tea Party. The 2010 congressional elections were a disaster for Democrats, who lost control of the House of Representatives. Political gridlock followed as the White House and Republicans faced off on economic policies with neither side willing to compromise. Republicans nominated Mitt Romney for president in 2012. Romney centered his campaign on his business expertise and ability to fix the economy. As the elections neared, the economy was slowly improving, and much of the political debate highlighted social issues that favored Democrats and Obama. Obama won the election, but Republicans still controlled a majority in the House, continuing the formula for gridlock. Obama's re-election did little to change the political landscape. Political dissension continued to characterize politics. In the congressional elections of 2014, Republicans stressed their ideological purity and opposition to President Obama's policies, and they gained a majority in the Senate. With Republicans controlling Congress, the political gridlock and political rancor intensified, setting the background for the presidential primary campaigns that started in mid-2015. Then, in late December 2015, came what President Obama called a Christmas miracle, a sudden burst of bipartisanism that produced several pieces of legislation, including a comprehensive spending bill. That bipartisanship vanished with the new year, with Republicans pledging to repeal ACA, defund social programs, and oppose the president's efforts to expand gun controls. Political gridlock was in full swing at least until the 2016 elections were over. Amid increased concerns about terrorist attacks at home and abroad by the jihadist group ISIS, the anti-establishment Donald Trump overcame his primary opponents and seized the Republican nomination. In the summer of 2016, Trump confronted Hillary Clinton, the Democratic candidate, in a bitter and divisive campaign. Clinton generally supported the domestic and foreign policies of Obama. Trump's Make America Great Again slogan relied more on grievance politics that stressed broad dissatisfaction with the Washington establishment in general and Obama's policies in particular. Despite their differences in policies, the campaign primarily focused on questions concerning the candidates' characters. Clinton was depicted as dishonest, untrustworthy, and corrupt. Trump was labeled too abrasive, brash, reckless, and sexist. As the election neared, most polls had Clinton as the favorite. But as votes were counted, it became apparent that most of the polls had failed to account for the rural white vote, especially in swing states. The result was an electoral victory for Trump. With Republicans holding majorities in both houses of Congress, it was expected that once the Trump administration took command in January of 2017, there would follow significant changes in domestic and foreign policies, a remaking of America.